So let's talk about the interesting role that the media is playing in this administration's deportation policies. Now, from the jump, I think the most obvious thing is how this administration is actively trying to use the media and literally have media ride-alongs when it comes to ICE raids and ICE deportations. If they're not just willing to have the media watch, but inviting media to come along and watch and document, it says that it's something that they think is useful for them in progressing whatever their agenda is. And we're definitely seeing that. They used a lot of the media in order to create more fear and publicity around what they were doing, that if nothing else, everyone was going to know what was going on, or at least know the extent and the aggression of what was going on. I guess they don't actually want you to know what's going on. That it definitely played into the whole flood the zone idea and also pushed a lot of fear with their actions. That if it's being publicized to such a degree, and if you're hearing about it, and if you're seeing how bad it is, or I guess how severe it is, because depending on which side you are, you're either seeing that as really good or really bad. So if you're seeing the severity, it feels like it's much more all-encompassing than it might actually be. And then after the Aurora raids that happened last week, we're also now seeing them kind of use the media as a scapegoat of oh guys, it's not our fault, haha, it's because it was publicized and there were leaks. It also then gives an excuse for if they start toning down the media presence of these immigration issues, that they're it's because we're worried about the security of things, we're worried about these leaks happening again, which then can either obfuscate them declining what's going on and their base won't really get upset about it or won't really notice, or the scarier alternative of they can try and obfuscate what's happening, the severity of what's happening, and as we're worried about them trying to do human rights violations, it's a lot easier if they're not having media literally riding along with them, and it's not as suspicious if they're using the claim of security of their operations. And a huge aim of this is fear and making themselves seem very omnipresent, which is kind of the theme with a lot of what the Trump administration is doing, is that a lot of it is fully unconstitutional, is being blocked almost instantly. But if they can make everyone feel like it's a very big deal and it's very scary, it's the flood the zone thing, which again, I'm talking about it, I'm going to get into it in the future, just put a little pin in that one. And also, it kind of gives them power. If you feel powerless because this seems insanely large, that gives them power. It's that manufactured consent, that if you're no longer trying to fight it, if you don't think there's anything to be done, then even if there really is things to be done, if there's no energy towards that, it's essentially over anyway. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. There's even a report from The Guardian claiming that the ICE website, when they were doing all their weird website integration, that also was the whole data purge and stuff like that, that when that was happening, they also updated a bunch of their archived blog posts about what had happened in the 2018 immigration raids. So when they updated all of these archived sites, it meant that they got updated for, I think it was January 24th, which means that on search engines, it looks like something new or something updated, even though these posts haven't actually had any content updates since 2018, which then boosts them in the algorithm and again makes them feel more prevalent when they aren't. It also causes a rise in misinformation about what's actually happening, that people might think that there are raids happening in their city, that there's active deportations happening in their city, when such actions aren't actually happening. This is only furthered by what we were seeing on social media and the social media reactions to things. On this end, we have people coming from a very good place and trying to be helpful and prevent harm to their communities. We also saw a flood of incorrect claims about where ICE raids were happening and where they were doing different crackdowns and stuff, which led to a lot of fear and a lot of unfounded fear, not unfounded in that the fear is invalid, but just it was not actively happening in those communities. They did not need to be actively worried about it in that moment. Yes, there's there is always that risk, but that there wasn't an active presence in those communities. It's what a lot of these groups now are having to find ways to prevent this misinformation. One group in Arizona is now having a separate hotline, and they're specifically having their people go and verify claims before they get publicized to the whole community, so that they're not just flooded with a bunch of incorrect things, but they're only getting what, okay, this is what you need to worry about. You need to actually avoid this and not completely stall your lives. Because the other concern is that even outside of the deportations, this is having a very real harm and effect on immigrant communities. People are avoiding sending their kids to school. They're avoiding going to the doctors, even the hospital. They're avoiding going to work. They're not going and supporting businesses. Even beyond the deportations, it's having a very real harm on the community. And this stems from this kind of not knowing what's actually going on, being so overwhelmed with everything that you don't know what's actually happening and what to trust. And not getting medical care is dangerous. Not sending your kids to school has an effect on them, both emotionally, and also it affects their opportunities in the future. That there is a reason why we have that right, that even if you are here illegally, that you can have an access to a public education. That is so vital, and it is this additional harm. On the other end of things, we are seeing how media, though, is having a very positive impact. Quoted as complaining about how well educated people were in Chicago about their rights and that it was slowing their ability to go and deport people. He described it as knowing your rights, it was instead evading arrest. I'm biased, but I think that's the craziest thing ever. Knowing your rights, it's protecting your rights and your rights to due process and the rights that we all have. It is something that I hold very near and dear to my heart, that once they take away rights from one group, they're going to take away rights from the next group. And it is very much so a snowball effect. Everyone should know their rights, and the police can't just go in and step over that. It's very powerful to see that, okay, education and the media talking about this education and getting it out there is working. It is having a tangible effect at slowing down their operations, which is one of the biggest things that we can do with all of this, is just slowing them down, forcing them to go over every hurdle and everything, because that is how we protect things, is just by, at the very least, slowing them down, stopping what we can, and also when they're slowed down, we have more time to find what it is that we need to do to actually stop them. Because at the end of the day, they are using these deportations as another way for them to flood the zone. It is the big phrase that all of the liberals and leftists have been throwing out there, flooding the zone with information so that we don't know where to focus, we don't know where to rally behind, that it's just kind of like, oh, everything's happening, we're running around like chickens with our heads cut off. That they're disrupting these people's lives for the publicity of it all. Because ultimately, these aren't criminals. 48% of these people have nothing of a criminal background. Their only thing is coming into this country illegally, which is ultimately a civil issue, not a criminal issue. And even when you get into the other percentage of things, it's very much so rallied up as if they bring it up as if it's this big scary boogeyman is who's coming into the US. When in reality, fentanyl and drugs, the vast majority of them come in through American citizens crossing the border, and not through people coming in here illegally. And ultimately, this is also being used as another angle to try and push the powers of the presidency and to try and push the limits of the Constitution. We kind of saw it in the first Trump administration, how he was trying to declare immigrants and everything happening with immigration as if it's a war or some kind of threat to the country, because then that opens up more presidential powers and more avenues for him to do things. And then, oh, well, if you can push every single one of these issues in court, if there's one ruling that has the right words that goes in your favor, then there you go. He can try and use that to push more powers. I mean, we're even seeing him trying to get rid of the penny, which isn't his right to do. That still lies with Congress. That is still a monetary related thing that lies in the power of Congress. But he's trying to push that too. And again, it's the kind of thing where knowing the law, knowing how the law works, that if you get a specifically worded opinion out of the courts, then there you go. Oh, I have these monetary privileges. I have this monetary power. I can take the power of the purse away from Congress. Okay, I'm going to go do all these other crazy things. You know, it's just, there's another angle where they're trying to push these powers. I'm hopeful that as we kind of become more aware, I think the first week the media was in utter chaos. It was working. Everyone was confused. Everyone didn't really know what to report on. And then now as we're kind of getting further in, we're kind of finding our footing with things. I think immigration is a good example to look at as we look at how reporting needs to be handled with the next issues that are happening. That, okay, focusing on know your rights, it works. That is a very good thing. Focusing on the areas in which this is unconstitutional and illegal and the legal battles going on, and watching those, that's very important. That's making sure that those powers aren't getting overstepped. And turning all of this fear and anger that we feel for our communities, and okay, how can we push that towards our legislators? Who are all the Democrats who voted for the immigration bill? Who are all the Democrats who we said, hey, we're putting you in office, you're supposed to go against this administration? That's like kind of the whole... It's part of why we put you in there, and you're doing nothing. You're being complacent. You are voting for these bills. You are voting for these nominees. Like, we only have to swing 4 Republicans, so don't be another vote that we have to focus on to try and make sure we can stop things from happening. Like, that is the first time, because I know in the first Trump administration, people also voted for things that we disagreed with, and I feel like it wasn't really talked about in the same way, whereas this time, for the entire week following that immigration bill, every single coverage, at least on social media, less so in traditional media, but that's its own can of worms, pointed out the list of Democratic elected officials who voted for that bill and went, hey, if this is one of your guys, that's not okay. And I think that's a really important shift that we're seeing, that as they're trying to overwhelm people and kind of confuse people of like, okay, so the 3 things we need to focus on is, okay, what reduction of harm can we do? What's happening in the courts? What can we do to protect it in the courts? And what pressures can we continue to put on to our officials? Now, as we're moving into more of the concerns around the Doge and Elon Musk stuff, the Department of Education, and I guess we're just going to kind of hold our breath and see what the next avenue is, that we are seeing our elected officials do more. That, yes, filibustering didn't stop those nominees, but it pointed out that we're not going to stand there and let it happen. It presented more opportunities for people to talk about why this is wrong and more time to make people more aware of what's happening. So that come the next election, especially with all these special elections coming up, people know that it's, hey, you might have just voted for Trump. You might have just voted for a Republican official. But if you're worried about what's happening with Doge, if you're worried about what might happen to Medicaid and Medicare, if you are scared about these things, we are the people who are trying to stop it. They are the people pushing this. In the next special election or in the next general election, you know which way you should vote for. That's important. That is something. And it's better than what we had the first week where it truly felt like people were just doing nothing. I remember, I'm in Arizona, so I remember after some of the immigration stuff and after the federal funding freeze, I went and I looked at Mark Kelly and I was like, he put out like a tweet. He put out like one statement on his website that said like, oh yeah, this like isn't good. I don't agree with it. And that's it. And it's like, okay, what are you going to do about it? Give us something, you know? Whereas now it's at least like, okay, this many representatives at least bothered to filibuster. They are doing something. They are on our side. They are tuned in. They are aware of their constituents, you know? And there's still probably a lot more that could be done. Like maybe, but hey, if this momentum continues, I have faith. If this is the end of the momentum, we have less faith. But the momentum could continue, okay? It's called hope, it's called optimism, and it's how you stay sane in this kind of political landscape.